Go. Okay, thank you, Council.
Thank you, Commissioners. We now have Gary Murray present to give evidence.
Thank you. Welcome, Uncle Gary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murray, for attending. Could you please introduce yourself in whatever way culturally you would like to the Commissioners?
I am Gary John Murray. My tribal name is Wurdikamula, which means messenger from the Murray River. I am the son of James Stewart Murray, JPOAM, Wamba, Warrap, Juraroa, Wiradjuri man, and my mother is Nora Murray, Nee Nichols, who is Yorta Yorta, Warrap, Jarjarang and Wirragaya.
And do you undertake to tell the truth to this Justice Commission today?
While the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, I will tell the truth.
Thank you.
That's what we've been taught.
Thank you. I understand you'd like to read an opening statement, and I'd invite you to do so now.
Yeah. Over 120,000 years or more, First Peoples are the sovereign original nations, clans, peoples, owners, occupiers, spiritual, physical, economic and legal users of all Victorian lands, waters, minerals, skies of Victoria across some 38 plus nations. First Peoples have embedded priority rights, first rights that is, to Victorian lands and waters, including cross-border lands and waters. And cross-border issue is a big issue that hasn't really been discussed yet. To deny our existence is to deny the rising of the sun, moon and tide. We now have an illegal occupation that's ongoing, and the Victorian truth has failed to address in any substantive way. I note the media release in relation to soldier settlements the other day by Minister Hutchins and also by my colleague, the co-chair of the Assembly, Gary Murray. I want to read that out in relation to yesterday's Anzac Day. Former Parliamentary Secretary to the Special Minister of State, Sean Lean, said that by 1934, 11,639 returned servicemen were allocated blocks of land in Victoria's settlement scheme. By 1930, Victorian government had acquired the equivalent of about 1 million hectares of land. In some cases, such as Coranderrk, Aboriginal Reserve near Healesville, in Woiwurrung country, land was taken from Aboriginal people in the 1950s and given to non-Indigenous soldiers. Reallocating that to non-Aboriginal people was yet another part of the terrible injustice that happened with this scheme, Minister Hutchins said. I'd like to see a photo of my father up on the screen.
I think if we can go to the submission at page 2.
My father, of course, pretty well known, prominent activist in Victoria for the whole of his life. He was a soldier. Before that, he was a bush boy at Boga and Barrow, lived on the island with his grandparents and his mother and father. That's Dad there. And he joined pretty young, under the age limit, and in 1941. And he served in some of the worst hellholes in that World War II event. He served in New Guinea as well as Borneo. He was to go to the Japan with the occupation forces, but his mother passed away and he got discharged. He come out of that army pretty bitter, because here he was out there picking up dead bodies, maggots on them, Japanese and Australian soldiers on the beaches in the hot weather of New Guinea and Indonesia. And he made sure that all soldiers were returned to their country for burial, whether they be his enemy or his friends. And he ran that principle and that value right through his death in 1989. He obviously helped set up the funeral service, and he took people that passed away in Melbourne back to their country, whether they were interstate or whether they were country Victoria. We all know about the hearse, the Aboriginal hearse, Al Churinga, that sits in the museum. he actually negotiated that with Tobin Brothers. So I want to pay respect to my father and my mother, for that matter. And given it was Anzac Day yesterday, I just thought I had to say something about that. And I've got to say something about this soldier settlement thing. Dad went in about 3 ballots. A couple of them, I think, were in New South Wales. Didn't get one. He fought for this country and he couldn't even get a soldier settlement. You think about that. Remember I spoke to Reverend Roy Wooden in 2007 at Grandfather Nichols' statue unveiling in Parliament House here. Reverend Wooden was the battalion padre. He told me everything that happened because he was on duty with Dad and all these battalions. Battalion was 2nd, 12th Division. And Dad was on point. He volunteered to be on point. That means when you're walking through the jungles of Indonesia or New Guinea, you could probably be the first one to get shot. He was a very brave man. And he also volunteered every time for the burial parties. That was his strength. That was his integrity. That was his culture. Get people home to country. That's all I've got to say about that. Any questions?
Yep.
Good.
No. Is there anything else in your opening statement that you'd like to say?
Well, there are around 38 plus First Nations. If we can put the battle map up,
Yeah,
it would be good.
On page 5 of that submission.
I thought I brought a bit of a weapon here. It's called a pointer. Don't be fearful of it. Not going to hurt you or nothing. Just a little red dot out there somewhere. Where can I see it? No, it's not working. Hey, it doesn't go on that screen. I can shoot you, but I can't get him. I'm going to have to wing it. All right. That's the Victorian Aboriginal Corporation languages map. There's about 4 or 5 variations of it. But we usually use this as a concept map. It's not set in concrete up to a point. It's a concept. But the concept is based on a lot of research that's been done over 230 years, but particularly by Dr. Ian Clark when he did his PhD at Monash in 1990s. And he produced a very large 400-page book on identifying nations and clans and the story of those clans and nations. And I recommend that if you haven't got it, get it, because it's a bit of a Bible in terms of conceptual mapping and who's out there. I do not believe that there is less than 38 nations. That is a verdict. That is incorrect based on the research. If you can tell me which of those nations up there don't exist, then tell me. Because as far as I'm concerned, that is about right. 38 nations, all right, what are we doing with them? We're combining some, such as Eastern Mar and Mallee Milawa and Wadjabolik, but then the rest have had to struggle to get their rights and interests and resources to pursue those rights and interests. The rich seem to be getting richer, poor are getting poorer with these unrecognised groups. And I want to name some of them. Bidwell in the east, Yatmatang, Judaroa, Waveroo, Nure Ilum, Araparat, Wamba, Wadi, Taddy. They're some of the groups that are not recognised, not funded. We have some of our people actually trying to undermine those groups by saying that they present a risk. That was a media statement that was put out by the Federation and 3 or 4 RAPs. They could never tell us what the risks were, though. I don't understand that sort of proposition. That went far and wide. And I think that's got a bearing on the last few years about why the recognised groups are getting stronger. Example, the Self-Determination Fund, if you look at the website of that trust fund, first 3 groups that were funded for 200 grand, 3 RAPs. Yet we were told that it would be a priority for unrecognised groups to be funded. And I put this to everybody, that if we can fund 29 health services every year for the last decade or so, why can't we fund a secretariat for each of those nations? Because at the moment, the RAPs are funded, the TOSs are funded, the native title groups are funded. And they're getting good, they're getting strong, they're getting outcomes. But those unfunded groups are left in no man's land. And it seems to be getting harder to get through the gate to get a registered Aboriginal party application in the Heritage Council. It's getting harder to do a TOSA or a native title claim. We have a native title rep body that is a monopoly, has been a monopoly since 1997. I was involved in the Northwest Regional Claim. I was involved in that was 97 to 2000. And then 2000 became the Wambawadi Barap claim, which my more learned friend there was involved in, Justice North. And then I was involved after that one basically got struck out. We then went to a Wamba Barap one, and that didn't work. And then we went to a Wamba one. But we had to get pro bono lawyers to run the Wamba native title claim. To the disgrace of the native title rep body, they have fought any claim that is not managed by the native title rep body. That is a monopoly that should be broken. Why not have a bucket of a pool of money where law firms and traditional owner groups can go to that process and get the funding to set up the secretariats and to get their native title claims done? We are dealing with, we get emails every day from government, Commonwealth, state, local government, individuals, community groups, asking us to do stuff. And we haven't even got any staff or an office. Now, that's not right. As I said, if we can fund 29 health services, why can't we fund all the nations that are out there? I think we need to restructure how we do business. If we're going to get to everybody on an equitable basis, not disadvantaged groups like some of the groups we're involved in the Northeast and Wamba. Wamba's in the Northwest, Duraral, Waveroo, Nera, Element in the Northeast. And the stuff we're going through with the monopoly, native title rep body, and the Heritage Council is an absolute disgrace on the state. They are killing our elders. You imagine being an elder pensioner having to go to the Supreme Court and fight a case with a prospect that if you lose, if you've got a house or you've got property, you could lose that because you've got to pay the costs. Some of our elders had to do that in terms of the Tangarong matter. Tangarong is now subject to this massive connection report, yet the state dilly-dallies around, and the Tangarong do. They're stalling to the point where they're waiting for us all to die. So we don't get an outcome, a just outcome. And the connection report that was done last year, given to the Tangarong and the state in July, has yet to be completed with the process that we agreed to in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court was simple. We dropped the case because of the fear of loss of assets for our elders and pensioners, and we settled for $200,000 to do a connection report, which is basically 2 ring binders, cost us $150,000, an expert linguist anthropologist and an expert historian did the report within 12 months. The battle with the Tangarong matter and the Northeast elders has been going for nearly 12 years. Been afoot for nearly 12 years. We've been through the Supreme Court, Federal Court, and we still can't get the state to look at that report because the latest obstacle, elders went and done a native title claim. We've done a native title claim, so therefore we've got to wait for the native title claim. But guess what? The report is also embedded into the native title claim evidence. The state won't deal with it. So I call on the state to deal fairly with the rest of us elders that are left. And we did lose Liz Thorpe and Margaret Gardner in this process. And a lot of that stress that led to their deaths is caused by the fact that we've been in litigation for so long. That is not good enough. We're better than that. And the state and the NTRB, I'm going to pick them out in particular, for them to get up here and basically mislead you about the trauma issue. They create that trauma. They should be called back here to explain themselves. They create the trauma. You sit in a Supreme Court process or a federal court process and you're waiting for all the bullets to come out of them. Two should be sacked. And I'm calling on them. They should be sacked. They've been there too long. They got no compassion. They're creating trauma. And we have not settled these simple issues. And by the way, the native title body was involved in the Wamba matter till they got sacked, and now they're undermining that one too. What is going on there? Why are they getting away with it? Because they're a monopoly and they're involved with the state, Department of Justice native title unit at the time, and now it's gone over to state relations. But they're still there. And they're telling you that everything's honky-dory. Well, it's not. We're losing our elders over this stuff. And if we've got any cultural compassion or any cultural bone in our bodies, we need to do something about it now, before the rest of us pass. I'm open to questions from council now, if you like. Please up a bit.
So is that the opening statement? That's finished opening statement.
Thank you. Mr. Murray, I want to track through chronologically with you, really, the history of what we now call the state of Victoria and its impact on Victorian traditional owners. You've done a lot of research and have a lot of knowledge yourself from your family history into what I can call First Nations prior to European contact. As you highlight, this map in many ways captures the diversity of groups in Victoria. Can I just get a sense from you about how Aboriginal society was structured prior to contact and the relationships between various nations in that period?
Lake George near Canberra, an archaeologist carbon dated some man-burnt pollen. Might have been woman-burnt too, for all I know, but this is what they say. And he carbon dated that pollen back 120,000 years ago. And that article that he wrote was backed up by Professor Marcia Langton at the time. This is back in the 90s when I was at uni. So I tend to say, let's talk about that time forward. Other people might say, well, we've got this Keilor skull out here at Keilor, 38,000 years old. We've got Lake Mungo about 40,000 years old. We've got Kabul Creek about 18,000 years. So, you know, we've been here a long time. They can never take that away from us. We are here. We have never left. I always believe that everybody left here. All the white people anyway. I don't know about whether that's true. But in that time, we have our own nations and traditions and customs and clans and people and territory and all that sort of stuff, arts and craft, law, LORE, and cultural heritage, of course. And that has always been there and it continues in a different form now. We've now got colonisation and we've got the invasion. People want to talk about the invasion as well. And that has made a huge impact on who we are, how we operate in cultural terms as well as law, LORE and everything else. We are now in a reconstruction stage. And I think that's been the case for at least the Native Title Act coming in Mabo. We're reconstructing First Nations, traditional owner groups, whatever you want to call them. We're getting different names, different labels. We've got to stick to the names, you know, Wamba Wamba, Barapparap, Gunich Mara, Gunai Kurnai, so on and so on. But the groups exist and they always have and always will. And we've got all these political, legal issues bearing down on us, in some cases causing us stress and trauma. some stuff's good. Don't get me wrong. There are positives that come out over the last, since 93. People are getting some of their rights back, etc. But to add to your question, where does it start? 1788, 1838 in Melbourne. The impact, we all know what the impact is. There's been massacres. There's been, I remember I had a conversation with the great David Gopalil, and we were staring at each other. We had a couple of beers, by the way. And he said, "Why do you look like that?" And I said, "Well, why do you look like that? Why does he look tribal and I don't?" When was the last tribal person who died in this state? Anybody know? Only Angelina Morgan, about 96. Now, that's an impact. Are we talking our language? I'm sitting up here talking English, Queen's English. Why aren't I talking to you in Wamba or Tutarora or Jar Jar Run? Language is important. It defines your country. It's like Italian to Italy, like Russia to Russian. What are we doing about this language stuff? I think there's only 6 dictionaries out there. And I think what we've got to do is get the rest of the language nations' language properly researched and done. You'll see in one of those books, which is the white one, A4 size. You got one of those? That's a Deuteroa book. Where's my associate? Yeah, shit. And the white one out, thanks.
Associate.
I can't call him number 12. I'm not sure. Yeah, the white one, hand him out. There's the coloured booklet is for your information. That's the Land Justice Group statewide draft book that we did in, when was that? 2019, from a grant that we got from State Relation. That basically identifies a lot of the information from Dr. Ian Clark's book that he did from Monash. Then the white book is a local version of it. We're starting to build this booklet. It's a Deuteroa book. So we put the language in this one in particular. And I think, if you think about it, kids in school and university and community people going fishing on the river, they should have the book. They should be able to access it on a website. It's a simple thing. The information is there. We've collected nearly 27 years of research in native title and cultural heritage in this state. Who's got it? The gatekeepers, the native title rep body. It's sitting in an archive facility in North Melbourne. There's restrictions on access and the rest of it. Archives is another big issue that we need to talk about. Where is all our information? We need a facility that we own and manage that is linked to satellites out in the country where people can access the archives, Public Records Office stuff, Museum Victoria, National Archives Office, all those places that have got our stuff need to hand them over or give us copies. An example is the Diane Barwick collection in the State Library. It would cost $20,000 to copy that whole thing, but if you digitise it, you get it out to everybody a lot cheaper. That stuff has got a lot of family trees in it. I'm not saying they're all right. A lot of the stuff is right. Some stuff we need to look at again. None of this stuff is 100%, 110%. All right? But sometimes you'll find a line, a photo, a word that changes what you think. And that's the ongoing research part. We've got to keep doing that. We need to map First Nations clans a lot better than what's been done in the 27 years of the native title body research. Some of their research is so incompetent, it makes a joke of anthropology and research. Example, to Tangarong to secure the Nura-Ilum people's country, Tangarong took their 3 clans. They took their name and they turned it into Tangarong clans, in effect genociding them. That's what they did. And the anthropologists excused it on the basis that I felt sorry for them and I didn't want to leave those 3 clans in limbo. So he put him in a Taungurung. There's no evidence about that he can do that. But he did that. That's a formal thing that he did. I think if we go to that map with the RAP maps, I think I want to make a point about Taungurung and Nurra Ilum. Can we do that?
Yeah, if we can bring up the RAP map. Oh, we just had it.
Next page, I think. Is it? I don't know. Where is it?
The first document that was shown was it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. If you look at the Yorta Yorta map and the Taungurung map, what's in the middle? It's not Nurra Ilum. Nurra Ilum, with 3 clans, 4 ancestors, territory, have been completely disappeared. Genocided by the Taungurung Ambit claim and the Yorta Yorta Ambit claim, because Yorta Yorta got half of Nurra Ilum, the other half has gone to Taungurung. They have turned the Nurra Ilum ancestors that are buried in the ground into Taungurung. They have turned the living Nurra Ilum people like Vincent Peters, elders Vincent Peters, who's about 76, and he's another one that suffered a lot of medical trauma over the last 6 years with this Taungurung matter. They have turned him into Taungurung, and he knows he's not Taungurung. He knows that he's Nurra Ilum. And that's the battle that he has to fight at his age. That is not fair. That is not just. And that's black people genociding other black people. Compliments of the well-funded native title rep body. And they're the leaders in all this stuff. I don't blame the Taungurung too much, because I don't believe that they're getting all the information that they need to make a worthwhile decision. I believe that a lot of information has been kept secret from the majority of Taungurung people, because what black person would support genocide of a nation with 3 clans, 4 ancestors, territory, tradition, custom and language? Why do we do that? It is unacceptable.
I'll jump in and ask, what is the issue with the system in that context, Uncle Gary?
The context of evidence standards. If you do a native title claim, the evidence is higher. If you do a TOSA application, the evidence is a low bar. A drover's dog can lay a claim under TOSA. That's a system stuff with the threshold guidelines and the Traditional Owner Settlement Act 2010, Victoria. It's also a bureaucratic thing. But let's face it, who are the gatekeepers? Native Title Rep Body, Native Title Service Victoria, First Nations Legal and Research Service now, the Department of Justice Native Title Unit, and then, of course, you've got the Heritage Council as well, because they work in together. If you get a TOSA or a native title claim, you get the RAP. If you get the RAP, you're on your way to getting the TOSA or a native title claim. But if you're on the way to getting a reserved seat on the Assembly, there's no guarantee that you're going to get a RAP. Right? Example, the Wamba group recently got first time Assembly approved reserved seat application from the Wamba group, and they were successful, unanimous decision. And that doesn't mean that their RAP application that's been in for nearly 15 months with the Heritage Council is automatically approved. But it works the reverse. You're a RAP, you can get a seat, just like that. That is unjust. And with that particular RAP application in Wamba country, I think the Heritage Council is stalling in making a determination on it. They've had it long enough. They've been given something like 1,000 pages of bloody evidence, and they had a 3-day meeting in Swanhill. Didn't even get permission of the Wamba group to go there. We're going to go out and have a flash dinner on Murray Downs Golf and Country Club, one of the biggest desecrations that ever happened in 1989 to 1992. 17 of our ancestors got desecrated. We put a curse on that place. Now we're going to go out there and have a dinner until they realise that their lack of knowledge would get out there, and if they went out and had that dinner, their name would be pretty well bad news. So they cancelled the dinner. This is the standard in the Heritage Council. Heritage Council should be supported by being abolished, and the legislative responsibilities and the policy and the funding should be transferred to another body, preferably the First People's Assembly, the elected arm. And I say this because the Heritage Council has been operating 17 years, 11 RAP determinations, although some of the RAPs were joint nations and the rest of it. 17 years, 11 RAPs, that's not a good outcome. We had 2,000 of our ancestors, both interstate and Victoria, still sitting in the museum, Victoria, in Carlton. Why is that? One of their responsibilities is to take those people home to their country. And if they're not Providence, to take them to an appropriate burial site, as we've done at Waroona Cemetery and other places. They should not be sitting in a concrete jungle in Carlton, in a museum, in drawers and filing cabinets. And how long have they been there? In one case, the Jara baby, an infant of about 2 years of age, died in 1840 around Charlton, probably from snake bite or disease. She got buried in a tree. Tree guy comes along, cuts the tree down in 1904, woodcutter, tree falls down, the baby bundle falls out, wrapped up in a European dress on the top and a possum skin with all her earthly goods in it and her remains. They had a coroner's inquest in 1904, and subsequently she got transferred. She was obviously a head woman's child, because there was ochre right through the bundle and there was a whole 156 grave goods in there, objects. They took her to Museum Victoria in Swanson Street, the old museum place, placed her in a filing cabinet for 99 years. And when we asked about her, when we were in the museum part, I think Tim chairs it now, we're all keen to take her home, and we wanted to take her home straight away. They said, oh, can we wait another year, make it 100? We said, no, thanks. You're going home now. And by the way, can you show us what you did with all the study research stuff? They produced a 7-page research document in 99 years. Now, we put her back in another tree because we couldn't go to the original place because the tree was gone, but also the guy didn't want a land rights claim on his property, the original site. And that's where she sits right now. Now, is she in a safe spot? Is she going to be free from bushfires, vandals, people, desecrators, or a lightning strike? The young Ballard clan that is in that area needs to make a decision, a determination about the long-term future of protection and preservation. And she's an important repatriation that came out of Museum Victoria. We've been involved in a whole heap of repatriations. Murray Downs Golf and Country Club was pretty traumatic back in 1989 to 1994. I actually lost my father in that battle, but he was going up there every day, and we had rallies and federal court and all that sort of stuff to try and protect that site. So the repatriation stuff has to be dealt with far better. I don't think the Heritage Council is up to it. You can't expect members on the Heritage Council, and all of them are RAP, all associated with RAPs. You can't expect them to know how to do things, how to prioritise things if they come from the Murray River. They got no knowledge about us. We're not on there, although we just recently got a Wampa person on there. That hasn't always been the case. Heritage Council is appointed by the minister. So where does self-determination lie with that? If self-determination is such a hot issue now, why is the Heritage Council exempt from that? Wouldn't it be better to have an elected arm, such as the Assembly, to take over the legislative responsibilities, as well as the policy and the strategies and the implementation of what we should do to protect cultural heritage and do the repatriations properly? How dare we let 2,000 ancestors, human remains, sit in a museum in Carlton?
Something you mentioned in your submission, just to go back in terms of the structure of Aboriginal societies, you mentioned that in your evidence that there were at least 38 First Nations and you mentioned in your submission that they comprised of more than 300 documented clans. I'm wondering what the importance of clan structures are to Victorian traditional owners.
Well, Councillor, when you read that book there, you'll sort of see the 38 nations laid out with their clans. For example, Gunditjmara, I think what was identified in Clark's research was something like 59 clans. Now, if I take one of my clans, Young Bullard clan at Port and Charlton, which is part of the Dja Dja Wurrung language nation, we're getting stronger as a clan. We have specific territory. We want to do our treaty, which will feed into the Dja Dja Wurrung Nation Treaty. And clan is an extended family group. Your uncles, aunties, cousins, your mother, your father, your grandparents, and all that sort of stuff, right? Where the issues are, the socio-economic issues are at that extended family group, clan level. Therefore, if we're going to do anything with treaty or cultural heritage or native title or TOSA, the benefits have to be equitably distributed down to those family groups where the issues are. So that's my opening on that one. But, 300 clans that, we put it to the now defunct Treaty Commission that she had to make sure that everybody was included. And it didn't happen. We all know that. Clans were wiped out straight away. We're not interested in dealing with clans or small family groups, which is pretty sad. When you look at, say, Yorta's got 12 clans and they've got family groups set up around that, the ancestors and that. And you've got 300 clans here that have just disappeared. We're not going to work with that. We're not even going to work with 38 nations. There's a big campaign. Federation ran against us, and I'm talking about the Land Justice Group was pushing this. And I still think it's a live issue based on the evidence that's in the draft booklet and the rest of it. I think we need to have a good look at that. The benefits being equitably distributed down to those family groups. We seem to be setting up multi-million-dollar corporations that become fiefdoms and don't deliver to everybody equitably.
I assume that, prior to European arrival, there was clarity around belonging and country and clan structures and nation structures for Aboriginal Victorians. I know it seems an obvious question, but what happened to break down that lack of clarity, I suppose, and the situations that you've highlighted today?
Shot with elephant guns, and smash a watermelon like that. Imagine that bullet going through your head. Poisoned, raped, moved off their country, kids killed, moved from Ebenezer Mission over to Lake Tyers in some cases, or over to Corranderk. I've been watching that Palestine versus Israel stuff every day. I watch it on Al Jazeera, and I see stuff going on there that I can imagine my people went through without the rockets and the missiles and the modern weaponry they now got. If we had 30,000, 40,000 tribal people across all those 38 nations, what happened to them? Where are they buried? What happened to them? They die of disease? Were they massacred on... Maybe we haven't found the major burial grounds yet. You know, if you're up in the mountains, for example, and you've got we've got 3 or 4 nations up there, where are they all? What happened to them? You can do anything you want up there as a white settler with a gun, and you'll get away with it. A lot of that stuff's already documented in the Gunai Kurnai stuff. But I wonder about the other nations in that mountains area. What happened to them? Obviously, we go from straight out getting shot and the rest of it to smooth the dying pillow, as I used to say. So we're dying out. Well, guess what? We didn't die out. Guarantee that. So they move on to, what was it, assimilation? Turn us all into white fellas? That didn't work. Then we go into, what was it, Tim? Integration? Integration, eh? That's it. That's the next one. That was, whatever that meant, was sort of maybe working together with white people and the rest of it. Who knows? And then we go into self-determination and the rest of it. So we have all these policies and strategies, and we get some benefits from them. But why are we here today? If it was all working, why are we doing this truth and justice stuff? Why are we doing native title? All those policies never worked, and they still don't work. We need to reconstruct nations, clans, family groups. And we need to reconstruct the organisations that provide services to us, whether it's the Advancement League or whether it's state relations, government agencies. We need to rethink the way we do business. I think the Assembly and the treaty stuff is heading in the right direction, and I congratulate the people that did the first term. I reckon they laid the groundwork for something greater to come probably in the 3rd or the 4th term. I think it's getting there. We still got to get everybody in there though, right? Everybody's got to get a seat.
You used the term illegal occupation, I think, in your opening to describe the colony and then the state of Victoria. On what basis do you say there's an illegal occupation?
Well, there's a couple of things. First up, it's no man's land. That's the law of England and everybody else. Terra nullius gets knocked off in the Mabo case. It's gone. So therefore, we're here. It's not no man's land. We're here. And then the second point, I suppose, is if we're here, then we're subject to English law. Why wasn't English law applied to the land thieves and everything else? And we're still tied to England. So how does it all work? You look at the Victorian Constitution back in, 1860 when it first got enacted. They've changed it 120 times or something. Maybe we start there. We simply say, well, look, you got us in the preamble of the Victorian Constitution, but what about some substance in the body of the thing that gives us some power and authority back and gives us our land back? It guarantees that the treaty stuff will not get overturned by a hostile government, national or liberal, down the track.
And part of the creation of the state of Victoria was to put a border between it and New South Wales. You mentioned before that cross-border issues need to be discussed, and on the basis that essentially that border was imposed and not created by Aboriginal nations themselves. What do you see as the impact of some of those cross-border issues as you described them for Aboriginal nations, particularly at that border?
Yorta Yorta, Barap, Wamba, and a couple of groups on that South Australian border are all cross-border nations, and they have rights both sides, and they're subject to state law, New South Wales government as well as Victorian government. What does it all mean in terms of, say, native title? Well, I'll give you a case study. The the New South Wales government entered into an agreement with some people from Denny who set up the Werri Aboriginal Corporation in order to transfer 30,000 acres of the Werri State Forest to this group of people. Now, Werri Forest is in Wamba Wamba country on the New South Wales side. The native title rep body in Victoria didn't want to really do anything and didn't do nothing to protect Wamba's interests, because the way that group was structured, 29 ancestors were listed in the rule book and in the deal. 6 of them were Wamba and 23 were from Wadjabolik, Yorta Yorta, Nura Ilum, Jar Jar Rang, Muddy Muddy, Taddy and Waddy and so on. They got nothing to do with Wamba. But that was the structure of the deal. So we opposed it. And we had to oppose it basically privately, because the native title rep body in Victoria wouldn't help us. And the New South Wales native title rep body was actually supporting it. So tactically, we had to put a native title claim in, and that's what we did. We did a cross-border native title claim. First time in 27 years of native title processes that we did a cross-border claim, because the Victorian NTRB would never do one. And I still don't know why. Yet when we sacked them in 2021, we sacked First Nations and we engaged a pro bono law firm, Massar Briggs Law. They lodged a cross-border claim within 6 months. 6 months. Now, if they could do that, why couldn't the Victorian Native Title Body do it in 27 years? What is going on there? Are they working against us? That's what it seems to be. They're undermining the Wamba claim. They're undermining the Nura Ilum, Wagaroo and Tutaroa claim. They're putting all their money into chasing clients that will object to us. They're funding clients out of Commonwealth funding, using lawyers from Perth and Queensland against us, against elders, against our families. All we want to do is finally get a successful native title claim and get our RAP and get a treaty done and hit the ILC for getting land back for us and water. And we are constantly undermined by the native title rep body. They should be abolished. They should be abolished. Their time's up. 27 years and we've done, what, 6 claims and 2 in native title terms and 2 tosses, maybe 3 tosses. Or
what's the issue with the system? So I've heard about the rep body and the issues there, but what is the issue with the system, whether it be native title of TOSA, making our people go through these processes? I just want to understand that.
It's not the system. It's the way people in power abuse that system. You know, if a native title body should go to, say, North East Victoria and say, all right, we're going to do a native title claim. We'll fund each group that's up there, each credible group. Yeah. And you got to put the criteria together and the rest of it. But they don't do that. They go up there and they pick one out. And then that's it. War starts between the groups. You've got the unfunded groups trying to fight a multi-million-dollar native title rep body with all their flash lawyers and the rest of it. I shouldn't say that. There's a lot of lawyers in this here. So
there is.
You know, that's a dilemma.
I'm very rarely called Flash, Uncle Gary.
Good. You look at Flash anyway. You've got a good tie.
That then only leaves one of us.
Yep. All right. So I think, you know, that the native title rep body's got a lot to answer for with the unfunded, unrecognised groups. After 27 years of probably $150 million plus.
In your view, does the native title system and the traditional owner settlement agreement system work for Victorian traditional owners? So they are processes in place. We get that. We've heard a lot of evidence around that, but are they fit for Victorian traditional owners?
I think our experience over the last 10 years in particular with the native title rep body convinces us totally to apply for native title and not TOSA. 2 reasons. 1, our experience from the Tangerong matter, and then 2, the cross-border issue. TOSA does not apply to New South Wales, obviously.
Thanks.
I want to turn now to the fight for land justice and your family's long history in that struggle. We've heard, obviously, and also from you today about the devastating impact of the forced movement of Aboriginal people onto missions and reserves. Nonetheless, some very prominent leaders grew up in that era. Who were some of the most important leaders in Victoria for the fight for land justice?
All of them. Every one of them. Here, now, and before. Every region, every local community has leaders. Many are buried in the ground now, which they don't even own. But the fight continues through my kids and my grandkids, myself. While I'm on here, I started this political involvement when I was in primary school. And the old man, Stuart Murray, used to take us to Communist Party meetings in Kew with Leamington cakes and cordial. That was the bribe, I think. They were pretty boring. Then we go fast forward a little bit, and we're doing the trick in 1969, and we get involved in black study stuff with Bruce McGuinness, Bob Mazza, David Anderson, and a whole heap of us. We used to go out to Heidelberg, sit around the lounge floor and let everybody talk about land rights and stuff like that. And then that scoped into, God bless us, the Black Panther days. Black Panthers, well, we weren't into violence, but we were into sort of feeding people, and we even had a black-on concert and a black-on fashion parade. That's right, in East Melbourne. And we were into dashikis, which are sort of black things and a little fist like that stuff. So we go through that sort of stuff, and then we end up getting involved in the community in Collingwood and Fitzroy. And obviously, you know, we all know about the legal service and the health service, and 108 Smith Street, where Camp Jungai was, and the housing co-op, and a lot of other things come out of there, Mesa, I think. So the movement has always been there in different shapes and forms and different people. But that's our history, and we should value it, and we should document it, and we should make sure that those that aren't here with us now, that they are recognised properly.
And you highlight in the biography of your parents, and particularly your father, his involvement in the establishment of many of those key organisations in terms of the Aborigines Advancement League, the Aboriginal Legal Service, the Victorian Aboriginal Land Council, the fight for justice to retain Framlingham and Lake Tyers reserves. What's your reflection of that, of the birth of the land rights movement, and what were the critical aims of that movement at that time?
Yeah, well, my Wamba ancestors are Rob Roy Stewart, Jackson Stewart, Ivan A. Stewart, and Jesse Stewart. And they were a remarkable family for that time in 1850s right through to the 1940s. And it was that family that they acquired land at Fish Point and at Lake Boga. And I think my daughter found some land titles where they ended up land across from the lake and then land on the other side of the lake and then down at Fish Point. So they were probably the first landowners that I could document that actually paid the £10 a year selection licence. But I remember a quote from Wirramanda Jackson Stewart in 1878 when he said, why, and he's writing to the Board for the Protection of Aborigines at the time, he said quite clearly and succinctly that I'm a native of this country. Why am I paying £10 a year? Because he was poor and he was in a drought and he ended up losing that block. And I think that was the start of it for us, that Jackson Stewart lost his land because of £10. And I think Dad probably knew that, so he's picked up on it as well. And a lot of people have, that we're activists. right? We're human rights activists, and you'd call us what you like, but we get involved, we participate, we vote, and people got to do that. And you've got to get active on this stuff. So you end up joining, you've seen my resume, and it's a long list of successes and failures and all that sort of stuff, but we accept both. I think we get involved in co-ops and associations. I got involved in the BACG, the forerunner to BAI. Co-op, obviously, down at 108 Smith Street. Used to get involved there, Camp Jungle Co-op and Mesa and the rest of them. And health service, we virtually lived in the Black Mile, Gertrude Street and Smith Street. And you couldn't help but get involved because the elders at that time drove us into it. And you either got away from it, melted into the community, or you got involved heavily. And that's what we did. And we still do. We don't forget what has happened to us, ever. We don't forget the dispossession, the dispersal, the deculturalisation, the loss of our language, and all the other bad stuff that's happened to us. Never. And we got to fix it. That's the most crucial thing. You got to fix it.
One of my favourite documents in your submission is a letter that your father wrote as chair of the Aboriginal Land Council of Victoria to the then Premier, Mr. John Cain. I think it's at page 97 of the submission. And I think part of the original is on page 99. I'm not too sure if it's been cut off a little. That's where the commissioners can see it at least. And if we just highlight that second full paragraph at the top of page 99, and part of it's cut off. The next paragraph, sorry, operator. And so there's discussion of seeking compensation, trust compensation, and then the second sentence, it's time your government made some real endeavour for a settlement or a treaty agreement on our clans. Canada, New Zealand have updated past treaties, mineral rights and royalties. Only equality develops for formation to be united, and so I just wanted to highlight that the Caulford Treaty in Victoria didn't come out of a vacuum or only commenced in the past 10 years. It's clearly been an aspiration for a long time. The 1980s were clearly a time where there were national and state conversations about treaty, about land rights, about Aboriginal political activism. What's your reflection on the promise of those times? I know that was an important time for you as well in terms of your own political activity through various projects like Gary Foley's History Project. I'm just interested in your reflections on the excitement, the opportunity, but also the struggles of those times.
Yeah, I think Dad would have been talking to Commissioner Burke's brother at that time about New Zealand and Canada, because that was his bag back then. He was right into it, eh? So, and Dad, he wanted to be educated too, and like David Anderson used to come around and they'd put all these papers on the floor, books and whatnot. He'd always come around before dinner though. He loved his dinner. He used to come around at home there in Glenroy. So the calls for treaty, well, it's not just about treaty. It's about what has happened to us morally, politically, economically, socially, spiritually. Treaty is supposed to encompass all that stuff, which has been part of upside down country, as somebody said the other week. Well, treaty now is trying to do right side up country and people. And this is what it's about. And many, many leaders over time, both past and present, and probably in the future, will keep adding layers to this call for justice through treaty or any other form of just strategy that we can get our hands on. we will never give up. And we just got to keep going, be positive about the stuff. But we're also losing a lot of people in this journey. We seem to be getting more deaths of our elders and younger people as well over the last few years. I've noticed that myself. A lot more funerals on. I think, and that's a consideration. The clock is ticking. And this is our time to do something proper.
You were critical in the establishment of the Victorian Traditional Owners Land Justice Group. Can you just tell the commissioners about the purpose behind the establishment of that organisation?
You say I was critical of it?
No, critical in the establishment of it. Important in the establishment of it.
Right. Well, Victorian Traditional Owners Land Justice Group came out of Native Title Service Victoria under the chairmanship of Graham Atkinson, and it involved 29 nations with 2 reps each. We would meet every quarter, funded by the Department of Justice Native Title Unit. I think they allocated something like 40,000. We looked at everything. If you look at our website, we've got stuff about natural resource management, traditional fire burning, land justice, of course, was a big one with the TOSSA Act. We're supposedly the architects of the TOSSA Act. But my recollection is that a lot of us opposed it back then. And in the end, Native Title Service Victoria grabbed the grant from DOJ, went off behind our backs and set up the Federation of Traditional Owner Corporation without authority from the majority of traditional owners around this state. And the Federation today does not represent this state. It's not a federation even, it's about 5 reps, and that's it. But they get a lot of funding because of their ties to the Native Title rep body. And that's a real problem in this state.
And what was the basis for some resistance against the introduction of the Traditional Owner Settlement Act?
We thought that the standard of evidence was too low, starters, and it was sort of new ground, so we were a bit wary of it. I think, we can hand you some evidence about what happened back then. We've got all the files and the rest of it, but I haven't looked at it for a while. So I think it was mainly about, it was too soft. It wasn't hard enough in terms of making sure we got the right people in the right country. And I think it's been proven. It's a Taungurung matter. Look how long that's dragged out, 8 years. So I think if you want to know why we didn't like it, look at the issues in Taungurung versus the North East Nations elders. Because that is the case study, the classic case study that no one will go near the TOSSA legislation until this Taungurung stuff is sorted. And given our experience there, why would you? You'd rather go to the Native Title claim and come across a sympathetic judge in the federal court, we hope. Right?
As a 1980s baby, before I leave the 1980s, you visited the Warm Springs Reservation in Oregon in 1989, I believe, and that was a quite important trip for you at that time. I just was interested to hear that story of your trip and what you saw and what you learned from that.
It was in 1987.
And I think there's a photo. Sorry, we've got I think it's document number 7, a photo of the reservation.
Teepees. Those teepees have a concrete slab in them, about 3 foot high, keep the rattlesnakes at bay. So we never camped in those. We stayed in the resort, 5-star resort. It was shaped like an arrowhead on the air. It gives us this idea about what is possible if you get your land back. Warm Springs Reservation was something like 957,000 acres. So that's huge, nearly 1 million acres. It's on a river. I think it was the Columbia River. And they got their own hydro scheme. They got their own town. Once you go through that gate, you are subject to their law, LAW as well as LORE. They have a tribal council. They have police to enforce the law. And they had a manufacturing plant where they were doing T-shirts and clothing and all that sort of stuff. Everything was there. And if we're ever going to get practical sovereignty, you've got to have your land back. You've got to have your land back, and it's got to be very large tracts of land as well. You want your people to go back on country. You can't send them back to homelessness, no jobs, no schools. You've got to make sure that you craft something similar to this. And that was 1987. And now we see on, say, for example, Facebook, I've seen about this post that someone puts up where 6 reservations are making about $1 billion a year from casino or oil. Now, from that, they pay people who live on the reservation a stipend of over $100,000 every year. So there's no such thing as unemployment or employment. It's volunteering because they can, because of that stipend. Now, I don't know how that would work in Victoria. I reckon a lot of white people probably freak right out. But why not? And where would we do it? Well, we've got national parks and state parks here. Some of them are subject to Aboriginal title under TOSA, which is pretty useless because you can't do nothing with that title. You can't go into that park and build houses. You can't do economic development stuff like casinos or resorts or stuff like that. And that needs to be changed. We've got to define Aboriginal title better. If we have to change the legislation to do that, we should do that. Basically, Aboriginal title is no better than a lease or Crown land being transferred from one pocket to the other. And a lot of the traditional owner groups in settling under TOSA or the Native Title Act, they have gone for that Aboriginal title stuff. They've been hooked into it. But we need to find out what can we do with it properly. If we're going to get back on country, have jobs and have education, we've got to sort that out into the bargain as well. But the trip to America showed me that you got the land back and you can do the economic development stuff and look after your people, then it can work. We're not reinventing the wheel here. So how much land is Victorian government going to give us back to do that? And if they recognise that we have never ceded our sovereignty, everybody says that, but it seems to be lip service. What does it really mean in a practical sense? Are they saying that we still own the land? If they are saying that, there's a reparation question. You took my land forever, you've got to pay me forever. Concept. And we've got to negotiate how we do that. At the moment, the sort of benefits that come out of TOSA and native title, I've got doubts about whether it's going to be viable in the long term. Long-term viability and sustainability is absolutely crucial in what we build today for the future.
I think that's really important. That's when I asked you the question earlier around was native title and TOSA fit for purpose here in Victoria, and I think you're starting to unpack that here now. It's really important. Yeah, I mean, because our job is here to, look at systematic barriers and make recommendations for change, and hopefully they'll be picked up through the treaty process. So is there any sort of further observations you'd like to make about those limitations to both those processes?
Well, the state collects revenue, billions of dollars in revenue from rates and grazing licenses, as we learnt from one of the witnesses the other week. So they're collecting the revenue, so we don't have to collect it. All we've got to do is negotiate a percentage of that revenue that gets invested. It's a bit like the ILC, something like a $1.4 billion investment fund. They live off the interest of about $50 million a year to do their land acquisitions and pay for their admin. New South Wales Land Rights Act had a sunset clause of 15 years, but again, it was about $4 billion they collected. The State Land Council and the local councils live off that. So we're not reinventing the wheel there either. So what is the formula here? And we've got to start getting our heads around that. Now, I understand there was a review of the TOSA Act in 2020. I don't know whether you've read that, but that was looking at ways of boosting the revenue and the income and grants and that in TOSA deals because it's too low. First deal under TOSA was 2013 by Jar Jar Rung, and it was a $12 million package. $12 million. One of the reasons why we opposed it. The latest one is Wodjabolic, and I think that's about 50 million plus. Big difference. And that's, 2023 figures. So is it getting better, or are we kidding ourselves about viability? It may mean that we've got to go higher on that revenue thing.
Something that, thinking about the Warm Springs visit, the legal basis for the exercise of power for Indian tribes is an early recognition of a nation-to-nation relationship between the United States and Indian tribes under their constitutional law, and the concept of a shared or dual sovereignty. And you've mentioned some of those words just now, and in describing Warm Springs. On that basis, have you reflected about, at least in a cultural or traditional sense, what needs to happen to our legal frameworks to be able to build that type of relationship, if it's one that is one that's desired?
There are two legal frameworks that we have to consider. The first one is we're corralled into corporate existence. That is, we've got to set up corporations. CATSI Act, Associations Act in Victoria, the Co-ops Act, and so on. And that's fine. But I think we've got to start minimising the corporate part. And what we've got to do, the main part, is a sovereign entity. What is the sovereign entity? Who owns it? How do we manage it, and so on? Sovereign entity, to me, and we're trying to do this along the river in the northeast as well as Wamba. We have a sovereign tribal entity, and that's mainly the Nerik, as we call them, the head men and head women. That feeds into the corporate entity, which we minimise. We might put a lawyer on, an accountant, and 5 trusted TOs, and they acquit and audit all the grants and quarantine the assets and the rest of it. We might set up a trust as well to look after the assets. But the sovereign entity is everybody's in it. It is the tribal council that I saw in America. Right? And that sovereign entity has a set of law and rules, and we're all bound by them. So white fellas would say, oh, no, that's self-regulation. And that could be bad news given what companies do and the rest of it. But I say no. Culturally, we don't need recognition to be sovereign. We don't need recognition for a corporate entity or a TOSA or a Native Title Act. It's up to each nation to work out how they're going to, in a practical sense, exert their rights to sovereignty in some form.
Going back to a question that Commissioner Lovett asked around some of the legal frameworks that have been created to attempt to deliver land justice. Thinking back to 1992 and the handing down of the Mabo decision and the passage of the Native Title Act the next year, what was your reaction to the Mabo decision at that time, and what did you think about both the opportunities and challenges it presented for Victorian traditional owners?
Yeah, I was at law school at Melbourne Uni that time, so it was a bit of a hot topic. But what does Mabo really do for us when that case was about Torres Strait Islanders? And whilst it sets a precedent, and it done things like got rid of terra nullius, and that's good, but what else has it done for us? I think you've got to look at Mabo in the context of the Yorta Yorta case. And we all know that Yorta Yorta failed 100% in terms of trying to prove their case, even though they were the first ones up the cab rank, I think, at the time. And it was interesting to watch how it developed over time with all the lateral violence and all the legal stuff that was going on, and big mobs of white people turning up in little halls and really saying, well, they're going to take our front yard, our backyard, and our dog and our cat, which is not true, right? Because native title only subject to Crown land. And it's only a right to hunt, fish and gather. So we looked at Yorta Yorta and we think, well, that one failed. And out of any case that was before the native title process, one would have thought Yorta Yorta would have got up. But when you have a close look at it, you could see why it lost. And it wasn't just about the tide of history, it was also the competent research that was done in terms of identifying boundaries and ancestors and the rest of it. That was one of the big failures in it. But the good news is, after what Minister Hutchins said the other week about Section 13 variation of the Native Title Act, we could go back and I'm speaking as a Yorta Yorta person, also as a Barap and a person as well, because Barap was impacted by that negative determination along with the Nura Elam group and the Waveroo group. We can go back and unravel that case and try and get a positive determination for Yorta Yorta, and also give the country back of the Nura Elam and the Barap and the Waveroo. If we do it honestly and with truth and with good evidence, I think it's been there 26 years, that strategy. So why didn't Yorta Yorta do it? They can still do it. Call a claim group meeting and authorise an application in a federal court. You know, I'd be interested in your comments, Your Honour. I'm told that there's been 8 successful Section 13 applications across Australia. So again, we're not reinventing the wheel. But if people are talking about, and it's constant, the trauma that come out of that only judgment, you want to fix it, get real, call a claim group meeting and authorise a Section 13 application and run your case.
Commissioners, I'd propose to take a short break at this moment, if that's convenient. I'm in the Commissioner's hands for 10 or 15 minutes.
Yep. Any questions before we go from anyone? Okay. So we'll resume at 12:30.
Perfect. Thank you.
Council. Sitting of the York Justice Commission is now resumed. Thank you, Council.
Thank you, Commissioners. Mr. Murray, you mentioned prior to the break the importance of access to archives for Victorian traditional owners and if I can summarise, the fact that so much research has been done about us but not by us. Why do you think it's important for Aboriginal traditional owners in Victoria to have access to their own data and the creation of that data about them?
In 1999, I did a meeting in Horsham in Wadjabolic country, and I had the privilege of going out probably for the first time to Ebenezer Mission. And I was on a path to doing research, and I was looking for Pastor Sir Doug Nichols' grandmother, Augusta Robertson. I had her death certificate and I had a marriage certificate. In 1872, she got married to Walpanoom and Jack Logan down at Ebenezer. So I knew she was in that area. And when I went to Ebenezer and physically had a look, walked around in the cemetery and couldn't find her grave until there was a bush and it was a hot day and the wind blew up and part of that bush, and there was a headstone broken in 9 fragments, and it was her. And it was just simply Augusta in the broken headstone. Then it had a bit of a biblical verse, and it was 1886 that she died. Now, from that point, part of the research stuff I was doing, there's always been a problem getting birth, death, marriage record because it costs families a lot of money to do that. To get historical references like Barwick Collection and all the stuff in the Public Records Office or the State Library, or even in the Native Title Body, was always difficult. So fast forward now, I've been negotiating with Vic Uni, particularly Professor Gary Foley, about his website of archives. So basically he's asking groups and individuals to hand their archives over to Vic Uni. They digitise them and they'll store the physical copies as well. It's a good idea, and I'm still thinking my way through it, but we need to own the archive facility. And there's all sorts of options. You satellite the strategy out to existing facilities and ones that are going to be built. It's no longer just boomerangs on the wall in a cultural centre. It's more than that. You can run online higher ed courses in law degrees and get 20 of our people to do that course over 3 years in your facility. You can keep your archives there, your photos, your audio visuals, all that stuff, so that a young kid can go in there and have a look with whatever conditions we want to place on those archives. So the Foley example needs to grow. It needs to be a treaty in archives that expand the concept of archives locally, regionally, and statewide, and even nationally and internationally. I think that's the concept that we're supporting.
And is that related to the movement for data sovereignty?
Data sovereignty is part of that. Yeah, of course it is. Of course it is. I think who owns it? Who owns the headstone that I saw of my great grandmother? I'm assuming that Barrington Gadget own it, the cemetery, and cemeteries are another archive thing, right? Because when you look at cemetery records, you'll see stuff on headstones. For example, the Corranderk one, where it's got all those beautiful names up on that plaque up there. They tell you a story, and that's part of the archive stuff. And cemeteries, in a different way, it's another issue, because we've never had a strategy with cemeteries, how we fix them up. They need to be culturally audited and properly funded, and there should be proper landscaping and facilities in each cemetery, whether it's Cumbragunja in New South Wales side, or Barrow-Ranald, or Denny, Moonacalla, or whether it's Lake Tyers down at East Gippsland, or whether it's Corranderk with 350 burials up there, Ramlingham, of course, and Lake Conda. There are archives that we're not looking after in a good sense. We need to do something about that, and I think we need to work a strategic plan out, all these cemeteries. And the extension of that, of course, the funerals of our people. Now, everybody knows that in 2024, it's going to cost you about 15 grand to bury somebody, to get a plot and bury them. Cremation might be a little bit less, but what are we doing about that part? Because that causes a lot of stress and trauma on families, particularly poor families. And I don't think we've got enough funeral fund services out there. We've got an Aboriginal funeral service that will bury you, but you get charged a fee. I buried my brother about 2 weeks ago, and it cost about $800 just to dig the burial pit, and that goes to the grave digger and his little lamp thing. So this whole thing about cemeteries and death and funerals, we need to start talking about it, because it is causing trauma out there for a lot of people. And, those ancestors need to be respected and recognised. The old man had a saying, respect the dead and respect the living. And also speak for the dead, because they're not here. This is part of who I am. I will speak for Margaret Gardner. She only died in 21? No, 22, August 22. So she would agree with a lot of stuff that I want to talk about, but she would also disagree, right? So I respect that. But she's not here. So who's going to speak for her? And she's just one example.
One of your quotes in your submission is that the strongest symbol of our land ownership and occupation is where we bury our dead and where our ancestors rest. So I take it from that and when you talk about cemeteries as archives, you're also talking about ownership and connection to country that's ongoing, and so it's connected to land justice as well.
It is, and I think that's that particular term, strongest symbol of your land ownership is where you bury dead. Think about that. All our people on country are buried on country out there somewhere, and potentially some developer's going to come along and dig them up, like they did at Murray Downs Golf and Country Club and other development sites. And we've got to have a good hard look at that, because this Murray Downs Golf and Country Club, and I've got to talk about it because the latest strategy they've got, they're building a housing subdivision, a suburb of Swan Hill, but on the New South Wales side, right? They're going to do another 150 houses right next door to the bowling green. There's 4 bowling greens, and we took one off them because there was 5 barrels, including a mother and kids in that. And what they did then was they turned that bowling green into a car park. So when you go there and you go and have dinner there or whatever, like the Heritage Council we're going to do, you will park your car on a burial site. That's the car park. And now they're going to build another 100 plus houses, virtually 40 yards from it, at the top of a sand dune. If you know anything about sand dunes, particularly along the New South Wales side of the river, there could be potentially 10,000 burials along that huge sand dune that goes on the New South Wales side of the Murray River. So the prospects of digging up more at Murray Downs is real. And that's what happens when you go to sandy areas, because we obviously didn't have shovels or shoes. So we went to the soft spots, put our dead in. We put them down 3 or 4 feet. And Murray Downs was one of those places where 17 of our ancestors were desecrated by a scraper. Scraper is that big thing that just goes along and scrapes bit by bit. And they pick up a barrel and they just cut it to pieces. We even found a couple of cremations on that site, which was pretty unusual to find cremations, the ancient ones. But this is the stuff that goes on all the time. And well, see, we've got the Cultural Heritage Act there, and there's another one in New South Wales. They're pretty weak.
Can I just ask, particularly in the context of the Murray Downs there, what year? What years are we talking? What year? Around about
December 6, 1988 was when the first ones were uncovered, and right through the next, say, 12 months, the rest were uncovered, and we took them on in protests and federal court and all that sort of stuff. But the farmers and all the landed gentry borrowed $7.5 million from the ANZ Bank to do this development. They sort of going to bring a lot of wealth to the town and the rest of it. And in the end, when they started scraping it, they turned it into 2 18-hole golf courses and a big country club on the top of the sand dune. And the burials go from the Murray River up the sand dune to the top part. And they picked the top part because architecturally, that's aesthetic part, the up top looking down to the river. And on the top of that sand dune were more burials. And in fact, when Telstra put the cables in, they made this huge trench and they cut a barrel in half by doing that. These were the absolutely repugnant things that people do to our people. No respect for the dead and no respect for the living.
Can you share any insights about the advocacy of mob during that time to say what business had happened there?
Yeah, well,
to resist that, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say.
yeah, there was resistance. Like our friend Peter Walsh was an MP at that point, and he had an office in Campbell Street in Swan Hill. So we had this huge rally in the main street, and about a couple hundred people turned up. And we stopped outside his office, and he got a bit of a serve. Then we marched over to Murray Downs and that. But you can't stop this stuff in New South Wales. It goes ahead. Very unusual for them to stop something like that. They let the development go ahead, and it's still going ahead. They're going to do stage 3 now. It's a whole suburb of Swan Hill. So, you know, economic development takes precedence over cultural heritage preservation and protection. White economic development. And by the way, they promised us jobs and all that sort of stuff in this new project. No one worked there. Nobody got jobs out of it. It was economic development for white people, not for black people.
I just want to reiterate the point. This is 1988, so not 100 years ago.
No,
This is
1988 to 1991. My dad passed away 1st of June 1989, and he turned up in a hard hat, blue hard hat with land rights sticker on it. And he'd round all those developers up, and he had a couple of meetings with them, and he'd give a talk, pretty bad. So he was the senior elder in it. He passed away on the 1st of June, and the unfortunate thing was that the Commonwealth Centre reported down to do the assessment on the heritage application, and he wasn't there to do nothing. He couldn't have any input into it except us.
Because that was when there was a specific chapter of the Commonwealth legislation to Victoria.
Yep.
And you mentioned that the Aboriginal Heritage Act, which was eventually passed here in 2006, has pretty weak, in your words, pretty weak protections. What needs to change in the Heritage Act to bolster protection for Aboriginal cultural heritage?
Yeah. Well, the case study here is very current. It's the Lake Terrell application to the Commonwealth to preserve and protect Lake Terrell. It's tangible and intangible cultural heritage. It's a well-documented astronomy, land, water, people story from the 1840s from a fellow by the name of, he was a settler, W.H. Stanbridge, who delivered a paper to the Royal Society of Victoria in the 1850s. So he was the start of it, and then the late John Morrison, Dr. John Morrison, did his PhD on Lake Terrell. But Lake Terrell is a huge salt lake, an ancient lake that goes back millions of years, and it's got 400 or 500 registered sites around it. Now, the local town, Sea Lake, they ran what they called the Mallee Rally, huge motorised sand dune buggies, had 100 of them going around this lake. In that process, they desecrated sites and destroyed sites over a 47-year period. Until 3 years ago, we stopped them. And then there was a conservation management plan done by the state. And we think that Mallee Rally is dead, but people still want to bring it back. Both the local government, Shire Bullock, local town and all that sort of stuff. So the usual stuff. We want to try and boost their economy by building a multi-purpose cultural planetarium concept so that we can link that story to the lake and the astronomy and boost the economy of the town and international tourists, domestic tourists and the rest of it. Good concept, bring in millions of dollars into that economy, but no, non-Aboriginal people aren't really interested. They want to do a venue for a rock concert on the shores of the lake. 30,000 people can fly in on a helicopter pad and all that sort of stuff. Another guy is, what was the other guy doing? Oh, salt mining. Salt mining on Lake Terrell. This is the lake here. Goes back to 1896.
Just for the benefit of the transcript, we've got up a photo of Lake Terrell and connection to the stars in the sky. So yeah, thank you, Mr. Murray. If you can take us to that photo and the cultural significance of its connection to Aboriginal astrology.
People go to that lake and they see that. You walk out in the water and you don't know whether you're in the galaxy or in the water, except it's wet, of course. So It's an amazing place. It's got that tangible and intangible cultural heritage. It needs to be preserved, protected and showcased. That's what we're trying to do. Whereas the locals want a Mallee Rally back, the dune buggies, and they still want to continue the salt mining. The salt miners are obviously, they want to talk to us now. They never talked to us in 100 years or so, but now they want to talk to us because we've got the Section 9, Section 10 Commonwealth Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Heritage Protection Act application in. We've asking the Commonwealth Minister to issue a permanent deck on the whole lake. She might, but she might not. She did approve one application somewhere else the other week, as we know, but this one is really important. The Heritage Council has been very silent by their position. They are very silent. We're going to ask them to support the application and to make sure that the conservation management plan that was done by Dr. Vincent Clark, the recommendations must be implemented to protect that site. There are burials around there, as well as artefact scatters and all that sort of stuff. But the intangible part is the most important part. As you can see by that, this has been recorded on an etched bark by the local people in that lake back in the 18th century. And that etched bark, we went and seen for the first time, probably the second time for me, but for everybody else, it's sitting in a museum in Victoria. The same as the two etched barks from Bort and the emu headdress sitting in the British Museum. Now, the argument in these cases is if you want them back, where are you going to put them? Have you got a climate control facility? Well, we haven't, have we? There's no building on this lake here, as there is no building on the Bort Lake. So this concept of building, which come out of the Warm Springs Reservation, why can't we have a planetarium, multi-purpose resort on that lake in order to showcase what's going on there from our perspective? And that will boost the local economy of the Sea Lake community. It's only a small town. It'll bring a lot more than the Mallee Rally, which is about, I don't know, $250,000 for the weekend they have it. Not much money, but they reckon it is. We reckon we could bring millions into it. And that's an argument we're going to have as we roll this thing out. We're still interested in putting a native title claim between 4 or 5 nations around that lake and a registered Aboriginal party application and a treaty. That's another way of, in the medium term, long term, to protect it. I don't know where the Commonwealth's going to go with this, but it's currently before the Minister. I will hand up stuff on Terrell to you at some point. It's a significant tangible, intangible place and objects, and it's worthy of World Heritage listing, same as Lake Condah, in a different way. So Terrell is one case study. The second case study is Big Lake Bort. Biggest scarred tree place in Australia is around that lake. 500 sites have been recorded, including mainly scarred trees, but burial grounds have been put there, in ancient times as well as more contemporary times. We've got a non-Aboriginal person, good friend of mine named Mr. Paul Hoare and Cappy. They built on their private land on the lake a keeping place, because what happens is all these farmers are handing in artifacts, rock stuff, grinding stones and all sorts of stuff coming in from farmers, which is a really good thing. And we need to fund that place to protect it and preserve it and showcase it. You don't have to go to Alice Springs to see cultural heritage. You can go to Bort or Terrell and you will get that experience, but in a different way to Lake Condah or even the Barmer forest in Yorta country. But the RAP has not provided support for the Young Bollard clan to preserve and protect and showcase this place. We have, the last 20 years, we've tried to get a place built and it hasn't happened. And I hold the Jar Jar Run Clans Aboriginal Corporation responsible for their apathetic approach to protecting what I see as the cultural jewel in the Jar Jar Run's crown. And I think we're going to have that out in the AGM coming up in November. It's time we fixed it. Jarrong seems to be getting a lot of funding, and they've got a yabby farm, and they got what's the other thing? Kangaroo grass property. They got Mount Barker bought by the ILC. They're currently building a huge multi-purpose cultural centre in the south part of Bendigo, $12 million job. But nothing is going into young bloods' clans' aspirations or bought. It is a significant place. If we're ever going to get the barks back, and those barks in the British Museum, they were insured by the British Museum, each bark, $2.5 million. That was back in 2004 when they came to the Melbourne Museum. So they, economically, they're worth a fortune. We won't get them back unless we've got to build them. And they've got to come home, not to Bendigo. They've got to come home to Bort. That's where they belong. That's where they come from. Those trees around that lake, my ancestors' country.
Can I ask, in your words, why is Aboriginal cultural heritage so important to our people?
Why is the air that you breathe? It's important, tangible terms and intangible terms. You've got to know the stories. This is not about Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. This is us.
Mm.
This is us, and it's biodiversity, it's cultural heritage, it's law, it's music, it's art. The Bort barks is one there that's an emu headdress. They put it on when they had ceremony and dance, and the women would get a cloak like this, sit on the ground, wrap them over their knees, and they'd have little sticks, beat the drum, and the men would dance and do ceremony. That's our stuff. It doesn't come from Japan or Italy or England. This is stuff that drives home the point that we are the first ones here and always will be. It's our law. It's everything. And it's written in the sky and the stars and the water and the land and the people. The people that were here before us, people that are here now, and the people that will be here in the future.
And why is it so important to, like, all non-Aboriginal people, that they understand this, like the importance of it to us, but also to, our history, but also our future?
Yeah. Well, if you look at this case study in Lake Terrell, Sea Lake. Now, obviously, Sea Lake non-Aboriginal people are worried about the economics. Well, we've got the solution for that by doing the astronomy facility, right? And that will boost the economy. We've got to drive that message home to them, that that's the way to go. And they got to get rid of this sort of, I'm a redneck and I can't do this. They can do it. But we've also got good people who are spiritual and who support the stuff. And I don't think we should not recognise that. I think we've got to educate non-Aboriginal people and our own. Not many of our people know about this. Right? Not many people know. They don't know about W.H. Stanbridge and the document that he wrote. They don't know about Dr. John Morrison's contemporary PhD document either.
Do you have any advice for non-Aboriginal people here in Victoria about how they can support the importance of Aboriginal cultural heritage to our people?
Well, I think it's not just benefiting traditional owners' cultural heritage, right? You only have to look at the register for archaeologists that do and tender CHMPs, right? 99% of them are non-Aboriginal people. They're working in our industry. If you knock the industry off, you knock off those non-Aboriginal workers who are probably paying mortgages and boosting the economy up and all this sort of stuff. So, I don't think people who oppose this sort of stuff understand that. Like, who's going to build a planetarium? We haven't got the skills, the architects, the builders, the plumbers, electricians. That's going to come from the local white community. That's boosting their economy up. So I think that's the message we've got to get across to everybody in Victoria, that treaty, we're an industry. We've got a whole heap of industries, cultural heritage, native title. We've got white lawyers, we've got white researchers, all that sort of stuff. And some are good, some are bad, but they're in our industry and we look after them and we pay for them. But my guess is it's multi-millions of dollars going out of our economy, the black economy, into the white economy.
Harry, I've got to just pulled up here a Sydney Morning Herald article in which you're pictured with the bought parks back in 2015. So this is an ongoing. How close is there to getting them back? Just amazing.
Well, I suppose I'm hoping that what comes out of the Royal Commission is that we can talk to other agencies about, even the Jar Jar Run Corporation. But the CEO went overseas. I think he went to Belgium. He might have went to England as well. But there was no negotiation last year when he went over with the British Museum about returning those 3 significant artefacts, the emu headdress and the 2 etched sparks. Now, I find that strange. I think we've got to fix that. That's an internal thing we've got to do. But the State Heritage Council, what are they doing about negotiating with the British Museum? They're aware of it. We haven't got the resources in the Young Bullard clan at Port to do it. We're not funded. All the money's in Bendigo with the corporation. But we will be putting pressure on the corporation. Don't worry about that. That's coming.
I just want to come back to my question before about the importance of all Victorians, and you talked about the ecosystem of people working in Aboriginal affairs. But what about just everyday people, living throughout Victoria who aren't really engaged in Aboriginal affairs or know much about, our fight, our advocacy and resistance? Like, how is it important to them that they understand and see, our culture and our people and our contribution?
Yeah, just like many of them love our Indigenous footballers, right? That's widespread, right through the AFL. And why do people love footballers? Because they can identify with them and, they're comfortable, it's their club and all that sort of stuff. Well, this is a similar thing. Be proud of the fact that we've got this culture, this culturally significant, tangible and intangible cultural heritage in your local community, in your regional community, and in your state and nationally. Be proud of Uluru, but also be proud of Terrell. Be proud of Bort. Because where you live in those areas, that's yours. I don't live there. They do. They got to preserve and protect it too. You go overseas, you can promote this stuff at family level or whatever level you want to talk about. It's shared. We're sharing it, right? We're sharing it. We're not stopping people from going out in that lake. We want them to go out in that lake and just feel the stars and the astronomy and its connection to that lake and our people. People lived there in the 18th century and going right back to 120,000 years. That's got to be worth something to a non-Aboriginal person. They're walking on sacred ground there and sacred water. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Speaking of Lake Bort, you have aspirations to build a cultural education and tourism centre there. And so if we can bring up the Lake Bort multifunctional cultural economic facility presentation, and in particular, if we can go to page 8, I think it is, of that.
Those dots aren't dots. They're spots on an eastern quoll, right? And that's the totem of the Young Bullard clan, the eastern quoll with the spots. Got to make that point. And we're still trying to bring that totem back as well. This is the big lake. This is where most of the scarred trees and burial grounds are around that. The private museum that my friend manages is to the north. He's right on the top northern bank. The little Lake Bort is the town's drinking water. The big lake is fed by what they call the Kinnipanniel Creek, The first mud and post dam was built at that creek into that lake. That was done by our ancestors. There's documented evidence about that and all that sort of stuff. 400 plus sites around that big lake. It's not always got water in it, but we can control that and bring water back. Got lots of red gums, dead ones and live ones around it. But it is a different to Lake Conda, different to Barma, and different to Gunai-Kurnai stuff. This is unique to Victoria, that place. It's culturally significant place and objects need to be protected and preserved. If the state won't do it and the Dja Dja Wurrung won't do it, we've got to go to the Commonwealth as a last resort and try and get a permanent deck. We just got rid of the duck shooters this year. They were on there, but they're gone from that lake. But there's lots of other waterways around that are traditional owners' business, and they've got duck shooting on it. And duck shooters are pretty bad news. A scarred tree could fall over, or they knock it over and they use it for firewood.
And there's,
I know, We want to build something between the two lakes. It's a multi-purpose cultural heritage planetarium type concept. Every traditional owner's got stars. We all know that. So let's build on it. How do we relate to those stars, and how do we relate it to the water and the people and the land? And that's what's come out of Terrell. Terrell is a model for every other group.
And you've already partly answered this question in terms of having a physical space to bring back cultural heritage items and to have a space that educates and teaches both traditional owners and non-traditional owner Victorians. But just generally, why are such cultural centres and precincts, as you've described them in your submission and today, important?
Well, they're significant to showcasing and preserving our cultural heritage. It's economics as well, because it creates jobs and training. It brings back our cultural self-esteem. Like, we've got a site out here at Glenroy. Used to be the Code School, Aboriginal school. It was on 13 acres. It used to be my old Glenroy High School. Well, me and my brothers and sisters went. So we got a bit of an historical relationship with it, because it's opposite where Mum and Dad lived. But that 13 acres got reduced down to 6. We fought for the 6 acres from 2010 with Margaret Gardner, the late Margaret Gardner, and other elders from Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung, as well as the local community was really strong on protecting that 6 acres, because the state was going to sell it for housing development. I had a friend who owned Metricon Home. He's no longer with us, but he reckoned he could have put 35 houses on it, 6 acres, 2-story. But in the end, we won it. And basically, the state Education Department leased it to the Merribeck City Council, who then sublet it to Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung. Where we're at now is we've had a feasibility study done, cost estimates done up to about $70 million to build what we're thinking, and we've had the architectural concepts done. So the Glenroy site should cater for potentially 3,000 traditional owners off-country that live in Merribeck and Hume council areas. We need health services and education services, as well as the sports academy and all the other stuff that goes with it. That's the plan for that Glenroy site. 6 acres, 13 k's from Parliament House, and we've been battling that for 11 years. All we need is the state to divest the land title to a proper, inclusive Wurrung group, and then fund the design and construct of it. And that will be an urban version of what we're trying to do in the country. First time. We can bring kids into that site, like a Camp Jungai thing, where the kids stay in a residence for about 3 days. They camp out. We're building tree houses into the gum trees. It's got heaps of gum trees, parrots and cockies and all that sort of stuff sitting there. We're not going to disturb that. We're going to build around it. So that's a real interesting concept that Merribeck Council is backing. Mary Beck's interested in putting in 10% of it. That's $7 million. I hope they stick to that. But that's the carrot that needs to be dangled to get the state to invest the title, put some money into it, just like they've done elsewhere in Jar Jar Rung and whatnot. And let's get it moving. That's the bottom line on it. Been too long.
My final questions are about the what you talked about being the reconstruction phase of the movement today, and you're currently a member of the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, and I just wanted to hear about your reflections on the operation of the organisation and its part in the reconstruction phase.
Is my daughter here? Oh, she's sitting over there. I got to be nice.
Specifically on the quality of the leadership.
Well, the first thing I got to say is that confirmation of Aboriginality and stolen traditional ownership is a real issue that all of us have to deal with. We're fed up with non-traditional owners coming on to our country, working our sites and getting huge dollars and then getting grants from the state. And they're saying there's a Judaroa, and they're not. They're not Judaroa. Case study up there. And we get these issues about non-Aboriginal people wanting to be Aboriginal people, and everybody thinks it's too hard. It's not too hard if a lawyer says he's a lawyer when he's not. He'll go to jail. Same thing with a doctor. If somebody is saying they're Aboriginal and they're not, if somebody's saying they're a traditional owner from the site they live on, or the area they live on for 10 seconds, 40 seconds, then it's fraud. It's financial advantage by deception if you're getting benefits. And I don't understand why we haven't prosecuted people who do that under the Victorian Criminal Code or the Federal Criminal Code. Because if you say you're an Aboriginal, you can get an Indigenous Business Australia housing loan up to $800,000 with low interest. Or you can get a housing board property on a low rental rate. Or you can get a job in a university. Or you can get a job in an organisation because you're saying you're Aboriginal and you're getting those benefits when you're not. Now, to me, that's morally bankrupt. To me, I reckon the criminal codes need to be tested out on that. And I really think we've got to have a good look at it, because the best way to confirm your Aboriginality is, and I'm floating this out as one of my recommendations on page 10 or 11, that has to be a register of all traditional owners who want to get benefits from treaty, RAPs or whatever. That register should probably take the form of the electoral roll of the First Peoples Assembly. That would boost the electoral roll in the Assembly from about 7,000 or 8,000 to potentially maximum of 30,000. About 30,000 voters out there over the age of 15 or 16. And we need to get them involved and get them voting on stuff. They've got to vote their members in, and they've got to vote for these treaties and support the events and all the strategies that the Assembly is trying to do with the Treaty Authority and Self-Determination Fund and the rest of it. Have I answered your question yet?
Yeah. And speaking of treaty making, then, what are your aspirations for treaty making in the state?
Well, treaty, if you read the book there, Councillor, the coloured one, is simply agreement and a book with chapters. First chapter would be addressing the question of sovereignty. The second chapter could be about dispersal, deculturalisation and dispossession. Third chapter could be about reparations and compensation. Reparations, ongoing compensation, compensations one-off. And then we go all the other chapters, kids in out-of-home care, stolen gens. What do we want to do with all those issues? And how are we going to achieve it in treaty? Now, we've got a few ideas that have been floating in the last 4 years with the Assembly, and I think the Assembly's going great guns. I think they're on the right track, but we need to start writing those treaties now. It's all right to talk about, well, yeah, we're going to start with statewide treaties in health and education, and that'll be interesting in its own right. Hopefully that'll get done this year and early next year. But what does a nation and its clans and its family groups want? Who's going to write those treaties up? We should all be having family group meetings and saying, well, what's in a treaty agreement for our family? Do we want better housing, new housing? Do we want jobs? Do we want better scholarships and education? Do we want to move back the country to a house and a job in a national park that we own? These are the 24, 25 issues that every family group in this state needs to start thinking about and addressing. Do not sit on a fence. Don't sit on a fence, because this is your time to get a treaty or treaties done, nation by nation, clan by clan, family group by family group. And obviously the statewide treaties is another aspect of it in health and education. And the whole thing is about increasing the quality of life and living standards of our people. No more closing the gap, negative outcomes. No more incarceration rates. No more kids in out-of-home care and everything else that's negative in every community in this state.
Can I jump in?
Those were my questions, actually.
Okay, thank you. How we're talking about treaties and multiple treaties. Just want to fast forward in your sort of view. How does treaty and multiple treaties benefit all Victorians?
Well, if the economists do the right economic modelling, we're going to save taxpayers multi-millions of dollars by keeping people, for example, out of jail, off drugs, alcohol, family violence stuff. We're going to give people jobs instead of Centrelink, multi-millions of dollars in Centrelink benefits. I remember somebody gave me some data on that, and there was supposedly 6,000 of us on age pensions. It was like 5 years ago. All right. Well, what's happening there with all these pensioners? Are they surviving with high living costs and the rest of it? We've got to try and achieve a lot of things in this treaty agreement making stuff. And we've got to get serious, 110% serious. I don't think I've answered your question.
Well, I think you started. If you just wanted to elaborate on all Victorians benefit when we sign a treaty and multiple treaties locally, what does it mean for everyone? What does the shared future look like is another way to articulate that.
You imagine a multi-purpose facility on that lake at Port. You imagine a multi-purpose on Lake Terrell. The economy is going to be boosted, that's one thing, but the people are going to be walking around 10 feet tall, particularly white people, because they haven't seen that sort of stuff. And they will appreciate the economics of it, but they will take pride in it. It was the same thing happened when we went to Lake Tyers and we did the first Camp Jungai programs in 1968 to about 1970. And the State Ministry of Aboriginal Affairs bought the 57 acres at Camp Jungai. And they turned that into a Camp Jungai program. The locals were very toughy about blackfellas coming into the Rubicon Valley with 57 hectares funded by the state and running these camps. They thought, oh, they're going to be blacks camps and all the rest of it. But they weren't. They were cultural education camps. They were orientation camps. They were all sorts of camps for kids and youth and adults and the rest of it. So in the end, the white community just loved that place because they also benefited because when we fed the kids, we had to get the meat from the local butcher. We had to get the veggies from the local fruiterer. And we took the kids out on a water skiing machine in Thornton, and the guy that was running the water ski machine, he was busy for 40 weeks in a year because the camp was booked out for 40 weeks, black kids and white kids. And then we take them horse riding. A guy named Robbie, he's probably passed away now, but he was an old fellow, but he was a horseman and so was his daughter, and they had this horse riding school 3 kilometres from Camp Jungley. We'd take them down there as part of the activities. They get paid for it. We'd take kids out on water ski and things with the local water skier out on Lake Eildon. So once you do that, and that's my experience, Camp Jungley as well as Warm Springs, but Camp Jungley is a transferable concept. It can go in Glenroy in an urban environment, or it could go out on this lake, and we would focus on kids in primary school, secondary school, tertiary, local public servants, whatever. And when you do that, you educate them, they get more positive about black people. That's the lesson I learned about Camp Jungley. Unfortunately, that Camp Jungley is not the same model now since it's been given a tunnel.
You've shared some views around the traditional owner groups, particularly about what they're not doing. But I wanted to ask you a question about what are some of the key achievements and things that they have been able to achieve in navigating the colonial system.
Well, the big thing is they continue to exist in different forms, going through reconstructions and doing your native title deal and doing your TOSA deal, doing your RAP deal and all that stuff. It's all good. It's going to bring benefits to a lot of us. I think that's proven. But we can't leave nobody behind like we have. We've excluded 10 nations from all these processes that could benefit everybody. Why do we do that? Why are we doing it like a housing commission waiting list, one at a time, 13 years later? We should be hitting it to everybody. We should be hitting them all and saying, right, get your RAP done, get proactive. In the old days, in the 60s and the 70s, we were proactive. We would write a submission in a paddock. We didn't have to have an office and a meeting and all that sort of stuff and put staff on. We don't do that no more. And I think the fact that those excluded nations haven't been properly assisted and funded to do the business that every other group is doing, and the fact that we've got this long-term waiting list, why?
Mm. Yeah.
Is that a wind-up sign?
Oh, no, I was asking if they had any questions.
Wind-up dance,
yeah.
I should say.
Yeah.
Keep going.
I don't have any questions. It was only if there was anything that you felt that you
I
had.
got about 23.
What's sorry?
I got 23 recommendations here, page 10 and 11. I don't want to read them all out because we basically touched on them. I just want to hand them up as what I see as, from all the networks I've got, state and as well as local, these solutions and recommendations are some of the issues that we talked about and a few other new ones. I don't think we don't need to discuss them. I'll just hand them up and that fixes it. Hey, you can all go home.
And the commissioners, I should tender the documents that were referred to. So that includes the submission and the photos of Lake Terrell. The RAP map, I think, is already been tendered. The photo of Warm Springs Indian Reservation and the Lakeport Multifunctional Cultural Economic Facility presentation. There's also a number of other documents that Mr. Murray's provided the Commission that will be tendered in due course.
Right.
And thank you very much for giving us a hearing, and to you, Council, as well. Thanks very much, and I look forward to the next step.
Can I ask one more question? Just one.
No.
Sorry, everybody. No, I get to ask the questions.
You can, that's right. God.
Like, this is about being proud of yourself and your family and your contributions, but also our people's struggle and resistance in being able to achieve some of the things. So I just wanted to ask you that about, can you share some sentiments around how proud you are of where we're at as a people, given the continual barriers that you've articulated and other people have articulated through this hearing block around land injustice? But what can you share any thoughts around that?
How long have I got? Look,
important question.
I have 6 sons and 6 daughters, who I'm absolutely proud of for the way their mothers have brought them up with the right values and all that sort of stuff. I'm proud of the fact that they've taken a lead from myself and my father and my mother and my grandparents, that they get involved. And I reckon that's really important, that we get kids and grandkids involved in the politics, some gentle stuff, some hard stuff. They need to understand what's going on out there. And I think when I think back on right back, I think we come from a long line of warriors, kings and queens. That's not my words, that's words that have described my ancestors. King Jeroboam, for example, in Bort, he's a king. So the head men and head women in our lives in the past and now, I think we're going down the right path. I think we just got to keep educating people. I'm proud of the fact that to a point where I've actually started writing 4 books, which my kids hopefully will drag a whip on me to finish. And I'll write a book about Rob Roy Stewart and Mary Jane Andrews, my Terrell and Wamba ancestors. I will write a book about Jeroboam and Maddie, my Jar Jar Rung ancestors, and Emma Kerr, who was also a Jar Jar Rung ancestor, as well as Kitty Atkinson Cooper, a Yorta Yorta ancestor, and Harriet Brown from the Wiradjuri group. I know who they are now. My dad didn't know who they all were. He knew about some of them, and he was proud of that because he learnt that from his grandparents on his dad's side as well as his mum's side. And the fact that we've got better access to research in that, you've got to build up that connection. And I think our family is well connected. There ain't too many questions left for us to answer about who we are. We know who we are. We love being who we are. And we are strongly connected to the Judaro, the Wiradjuri and Yorta Yorta and Barap and Wamba and Jar Jar Rung and Wirragaya. And we will exert our rights and interests across all that country on behalf of our ancestors, because that is our absolute cultural duty and obligation to our ancestors, because they're not here. We speak for the dead, bottom line. And we also speak for the living. And I want to make sure that that point is abundantly clear in everything I do before I go. I'm not long on this planet. I've just lost my brother. He was a bit older than me. He was 75. I'm 73 this year. But it's all good, because I think we're going to leave it in good hands. I'm looking forward to the next chapter. Spiritually.
Great note to end on.
Oh, Auntie Eleanor. Thank you.
Commissioners, I think we are free to adjourn and recommence at around 2 p.m.
Commission now adjourned till 2 p.m.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.